Hello, welcome back to the final session in tonight's Lockdown Money Live. I hope you found everything so far useful, helped you get a better understanding of how your money can work right now during the crisis as lockdown starts to ease. Naomi, thank you so much. We'll do a little proper thank you at the end as well, but Naomi's hosted two fantastic sessions, so thank you so much to you.
Very welcome.
Yeah, so I didn't let you introduce yourself there. Sorry, I just went straight into it.
Thank you to you for hosting too as well.
What else can you say? Yeah. Naomi will pop back in about half an hour. If you've got any questions for me and the guests I've got coming up right now, the best places to do that are on the Skint Dad Facebook page, the UK Money Bloggers Facebook page, or any of the Skint Dad Facebook groups. If you do that, Naomi will be looking for them and then feeding them through to us later on, so we can hopefully help you if you've got any questions about the topics we're about to go through. So thank you, Naomi.
Thank you. Enjoy. Have fun, everyone.
And this final session is called Spending Less During Lockdown, What to Do with Any Extra Cash. So though the sessions we've had so far, I've kind of focused largely on not having enough money, things being a bit tight because, let's face it, you've got less money coming in. But there's still a large proportion of people who have carried on working at full pay, albeit at home. So the income has been as normal, but the expenses have been a lot less. So whether that means commuting has disappeared completely out of the monthly expenses, going out a lot less. I mean, there's just so many ways that money could be now sitting in your bank account rather than going to use. But actually, this possibly gives you an opportunity to put it to use somewhere else and actually do something more with it. So I'm going to welcome in my two fantastic guests who decided to have with me. I've got Sara Williams from the Camel blog, and I've got Damian Fahy from the Money to the Masses website. Hello, guys. How are you?
Hi, I'm good.
I'm good, thank you, Andy.
Do you want to tell us very quickly about your site, so if people want to check them out, they know what they are, Sara?
Yeah, I've got a blog called Debt Camel, silly name, hope you'll remember what it is, where I blog all about debt and credit ratings in Britain. I'm actually a debt advisor myself, but this is my personal website with all my own opinions, where I tend to tell things how they are with a bit of common sense.
Lovely. And Damian?
Okay, so Money to the Masses is now a website. It started off 10 years ago as a blog, but then grew and grew. And basically, Money to the Masses, we talk about everything to do with investing, pensions, mortgages, life insurance. It's all the personal finance stuff about what to do with your money. It covers a range of topics, including some of the money saving stuff, but it's principally around about financial planning.
Lovely. And that's what makes you two both the perfect people for this session. So let's start things off. Interested to get both your thoughts on this. Now, obviously, we know that lockdown is being eased quite dramatically, moving from stage 4 to stage 3. Car showrooms, open air stuff from Monday will be open in a couple of weeks. In theory, the shops are going to open to some extent as well. And I think there's going to be a lot of people there who are thinking, fantastic, I can get out, I can spend money, not just as a release, to get out of the house and to make up for the money that they've not done. But also, potentially, is there a kind of a duty on us, if you've got enough money, to do that, to get out and spend some cash? Is it actually realistically something that can help boost the economy? Is it something that will save businesses from going under, large and small? What do you think, Damian?
Yeah, it will do. What will happen in all likelihood is people will start to go back and spend. But I don't think we have a duty, because of course, if you've got a favourite local business, you want to support it, you want to help it get through. And that's very different to the very big brands that don't pay any tax in the UK. So we sort of split those two apart. But I think what we'll get some people start to go back, but they're going to have to adjust slowly, because don't forget, although we're starting to open the economy now, the coronavirus hasn't gone anywhere just yet. We could get a second wave. People will still be nervous, because you've got to think that there are people still being furloughed, people's companies still struggling. And so that delay is probably going to play out for a bit longer. So I'm not sure we're going to have the immediate bounce back. On your point, should you be, is it your duty to do it? I would actually say it's not. It's more people's personal duty to look after themselves to a certain point, because Government, as we know, won't always do it for certain people. There are key people, I won't list them, but particularly renters, people who are freelancers, have been kind of left out of a lot of the schemes that the government have launched, which I think you guys talked about earlier. But you are going to be taxed higher. This is the reality of the situation. At some point, this money is going to be paid back. And it inevitably will mean that everybody will probably have to pay more tax somewhere along the line. So you will be doing your duty because you'll have to by compulsion. But I do think it is good to go out and spend, but only if you feel that you need it. I do think the one thing that's been good about this period is I think it's got people to reflect about the amount of products they buy, consumerism and things they don't need. And if anybody's like me, they've looked at their finances and it's been a good time to do that, cut out the stuff they don't need and actually try and take that forward into like the new world once it all gets back to normal.
So what do you think? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with Damian there. I think everyone's duty is to look after their own family first, to make sure that your family is covered no matter what can be thrown at you in the next few years and going forward, so that you'll be able to pay off your mortgage, have a good pension. And if you're doing those, you're not going to end up being a burden on the state. You know, you are actually helping everybody by doing those things. And I think those are what people need to focus on. But like Damian says, I think me and all my friends, we all know little local businesses that are struggling now that we want to support going on. And, people have been saying, well, the only place I can buy this at the moment is Amazon. I don't like it, but literally at lockdown, it's the only way I can get it. But going forwards, I'm going to support my local bookshop. I'm going to support more local businesses. And I hope we see more of that.
Yeah, I echo that absolutely. I think Amazon and some of these larger companies, because we can't get to shops, they have seen their share of sales, really shoot up. They have done very well out of this crisis. But even if you don't feel comfortable going out of the house as lockdown eases, even if some of your shops aren't available to you, you can still shop with them locally if you do want to support them online. You don't have to actually sort of be physically in the store. Okay, Sarah, so one of the things as a personal finance expert that we often recommend people to do if they have got any spare cash is to, first of all, prioritise getting rid of the debts, put it on debts. Is that still the case with any money you've got right now?
I think so. I mean, I'm assuming here you really do have spare money, and that sometimes isn't actually obvious to somebody. It's quite hard to tell when all this everyday spending, money coming in, money going out, is actually crossing over into a dangerous debt situation. And from a debt advisor's point of view, the question is, can you make all the minimum payments to your debts this month and next month and the month after, and not run up any more debt? So not, well, I'm paying my credit cards nicely, but my overdraft's going off. That's shuffling debt around. It's not in a safe position. But if you can make at least the minimum payments every month, so then if you don't spend any more, then your debts are going to carry on going down. Now, if you've got spare money, you can do two things. You can either put it aside in an emergency fund, and I think we all see the benefit now of having a good emergency fund. If we haven't been hit ourselves, our income, we all know people who have had those problems. Or you can then start paying off your debts, because if you pay off your debts now and you do get into financial problems in the future, those are going to be a lot easier to handle if you don't have great large credit card bills.
So if you have got these debts right now and you've got this spare cash, you've got these savings, there are a few approaches, obviously, to trying to pay them off. What do you think is the best thing to start doing in terms of getting that out of the way, making that cheaper?
I think the first thing to do is the very boring one of actually listing your debts and working out what interest rate you're paying on them and whether that's going to change in the future. Because you might have a 0% credit card at the moment, but, come December, it's going to shoot up to something really high. You need to know when that's going to happen. And if you've bought any buy now, pay later deals on credit cards, it's really vital you clear those by the time they end, even though they're at 0% now, because otherwise you're going to hit with a great big backdated interest rate bill come at the end of it. So the first thing is to make a list and see what you've got. And then if you've just got 2 or 3 debts with different interest rates on, the age-old question which people, money bloggers always talk about is, which should you pay off first? Should you pay off the high interest ones first? Because that means you minimize the amount of interest you pay, which sounds good, which is good. Or should you pay off the small debts first? Because by paying off small debts, you get this great feeling of achievement. You actually see you are making progress. And there isn't really a right answer. It depends what's right for you. It depends what's right for your debts. If you've got a small debt, a really small debt and a whopping great big one, it's nice to get rid of that small one. But if you've got one on a really high interest rate, then that's got to be your top priority, getting rid of that one. So there isn't an absolute right answer. It depends what feels right for you. But have a list, think about them all and make a decision, and then go for one and clear that one.
I think it's a fundamentally that money you've got that's either could be sitting there now because you've amassed it a little bit, that could be a nice chunk payment, or if this is going to carry on, if you are someone who, let's say that commuting cost might not come back. We know a lot of employers are planning for people not coming back until much later in the year. You can make an increased payment sort of every month sort of thing on one of those debts, or you might have a single debt. But certainly I think a good idea to get rid of that stuff that's costing you money. Now yes. Damian, Sarah touched there on having an emergency fund. And I mean, this is the perfect example of where an emergency fund, if you've got one, has been just so vital. Now, let's say someone hasn't got any debts, or they've got enough and they clear it pretty soon. I mean, it feels to me that the next step, or instead of, is to make sure that you have got some savings, you've got a fund. Do you agree?
I agree, Andy. I think 2020 will be used as a case study for the importance of emergency funds. Now, I will talk about to people about emergency funds. It's the core financial plan, one of the things you need to do first, along with paying off debt. Sarah will talk about these things to people, but people always get overexcited and they go, and I want to get investing. I want to start to invest my money because it's sexy, it's exciting, and saying being a bit prudent and planning. And the 2020 will be the year where nearly everybody realised the importance of having a backup, so having that emergency fund. And the idea of the furlough schemes that came in, it was no coincidence that they all started being like 3 to 6 months, because that's where they think people should be able to survive if they've got money put aside. And I think for most people, they now need to realise how fragile their life is, because so many of us had periods where if it wasn't them personally, they would know somebody whose business just unravelled overnight. If you had a travel agency, you went from boom to almost bust overnight. And those businesses are still going to take time to recover. And it's the same for people who were working for employers. It was all fantastic. And then suddenly they were furloughed or being on reduced pay. Or ultimately, don't forget, people who are furloughed could in time still be made redundant. This isn't over. And I think that the emergency fund now, people are realising that just how fragile we all are. Nobody would ever have thought of the worst case scenario you could plan for. Nobody would have planned for a pandemic. This is the worst case scenario where we can't talk to people, we can't do anything. And I think now we can get through this period. If you can stress test your finances to a period like this, and we will remember it, because don't forget, when you go back sort of decades when people were far more prudent, that was because they lived through a period of time where they needed to be prudent. There wasn't the credit that was available then. But of course, as credit became more readily available, those lessons got lost. And so now I think we're all going to be a lot more safety checking, stress testing our finances. Have we got savings? And I think, I'm with you, Andy. I think people should start doing it. I think we're going to have people doing it naturally now. They're suddenly realising that they need to be able to save up a bit of money just in case they can't afford to pay their mortgage, they lose their job or something like that. And also I think businesses will become a little bit more cautious, which has its good and bad parts, but they should have more money held back, because we're always encouraged to spend and the Bank of England having interest rates low is all a play to make people spend more money. But I think naturally we're going to start spending a little bit less, at least for a period of time anyway.
Yeah, I mean that would be great. You mentioned there sort of war generations, and we've all had like a gran or an elderly aunt or someone like that who's still almost stuck to that kind of rationing, hoarding thing with all the tins of food that were being there for a long time because they got into the habit. That's what they had to do with their food, and perhaps it wouldn't be lovely if people have now got into that. Some people anyway who can afford to have got into that habit of not spending as much, so they keep on doing that and then squirrel that away into another fund. I think that would be lovely. Are there any kind of golden rules, Damian, in terms of how much we should be building up? You mentioned the sort of 3-6 months there. If you're starting from scratch more or less, or you need to build it up a bit, is that 3 to 6 months of expenses still the key thing?
I think it's ultimately the bigger the better is the pot. That's really the rule. But people realistically say 3 to 6 months. Now, if you said 6 months salary, then if you think about even this crisis, we're going to hope to be further through it by that point and be able to survive. So I think for people, they shouldn't obsess about it because it seems a bit of an Everest to save 6 months salary. Most people struggle to do that. And it's more about having a mindset of trying to do it slowly. So even if they're just chipping away at it, and there's loads of apps that people will talk about that help you save, like Naomi and her group, they'll talk about the various different apps out there that can save the change and all these things. They're steps in the right direction. It just changes your mindset a little bit, and over time, don't forget, we can have a whole period, like a boom time in an economy where we won't have this threat again. And if you do that over a number of years, you'll soon have a couple of months salary. You don't have to do it all in one day or in 1 month or anything like that. It could take time. But if you set the wheels in motion, that you're trying to pay yourself first, put a bit of money away, you will eventually get that security. So that's my tip to people. Don't obsess about the end game. It's more about the process.
Yeah, and you're right. It could take people a while. I mean, a lot of the stats over the last few years about how few people have got any savings at all, let alone even £500. So it is a big, big total to idea that you want to have that larger sum. But again, this could be the time that more money left in your account than ever before for some people at least. And actually, an interesting thing, if you do leave it in your account, I think, Sarah, you touched on this before, you might not realise that it's savings. It is a separate fund. So I think it's well worth moving it elsewhere. So it's I can't even say it. It's a separate fund, separate pot of cash. Anyway, I always struggle with that word. I don't know why. Damian, I mean, what else do I need to think about in that account? A separate account so you don't spend it. Easy access, interest, are these kind of things worth looking at?
I mean, for an emergency fund, you'd always want it to be easy access. So it means that should the worst happen, you can get to the money. Now, you're not going to earn much money on it. Let's be honest. You're probably at best going to get about 1%. So you're really doing it for the safety of being able to have that money to access it. I mean, if once you start gaining more money than you need as an emergency fund, then you can start to put the money away for longer. So you can lock it away for maybe a year and you'll get a bit more interest. I mean, you're not going to get rich doing it. It's still only like another % on top of that. But it's more about saving for a rainy day. But then you then move up the scale to investment. But just going back a point, what you mentioned earlier about people and how much they put away. Now, there's no rule of thumb to any of this. But quite a prudent way of looking at it is if people started saving around about 10% of what they have income. It's quite a big number, but if they did over a long period of time, they'd eventually accrue a huge sum by the time they retired. It's just the law of, when you do the compounding effect. So when you get interest on your interest or your investments. And so if you think about that, if anybody was to even do that amount, it's going to take them a long time to get 6 months salary. So I just think people have to be realistic about the amount that they save. Don't worry about it takes a long time. But this period of time has also been quite useful because we've all learned how to shave 10% off of nearly everything we've spent because we've had to. And so we can do it. That's the point. We can do it when we have to. So, the lesson is put it away into instant access, then move on to savings. But it also depends on what you're trying to achieve, lifetime ISAs, etc. if you're saving for a house.
Yeah, well, we can touch on those again in a moment. Sarah, something I think is quite interesting when you talk to people who do have debts, and not necessarily massive debts, but just friends, people who are kind of like, they've got a credit card, for example, and they're paying a stupid amount of interest on it. But they've also got a separate savings pot already, which can easily wipe out that debt. And part of that is in their head, they have that idea of, well, I need my savings in case something goes wrong, rather than the kind of normal advice that we would probably say is no, wipe out any debt with the savings because you can always borrow again. But there is very much a kind of a reassurance to having a savings pot, whatever the situation. Do you think it can be ever a good idea to perhaps sort of like make that debt cheaper? If you've got a credit card, put it to a 0% card right now so you can still keep the savings fund there. Or is that still just, is it just the healthiest thing, the safest thing? Get rid of everything and start again.
I am a great believer in simplicity, because I think people can spend too much time juggling different financial products to try and save small amounts of interest, and things can just get really complicated, and who wants to spend their time trying to do this? 0% balance transfer cards are brilliant. They're harder to get than they have been. And often the limits you get are smaller than they were. So I talked before about people shuffling debt around, and that's not actually clearing it. And that really does apply to 0% credit cards. If you've got one at the moment, you can't assume when you get to the end, you're going to be able to get another one. So you need to be thinking of that as real debt now, even if it's real cheap debt at the moment, because it might be more expensive. But if you've got a great credit rating and you haven't got stacks of debt at the moment, but some of it you're paying interest on, go for a 0% card. Switch your money over to that. And then the best thing to do is to say it's on 0% for 18 months, divide the amount by 18, pay 1/18 off every month. You've got a 0% loan. And at the end of your 0% loan, you're guaranteed you're not going to have any debt at the end of it.
And I think when that's done and people are still worried about potentially wiping out an emergency fund, although, as you say, it is getting harder to borrow, if there is an emergency, they still can do something again. They could get another credit card later on if they need it. But if they don't need it right now, you may as well kind of just get rid of it rather than pay any kind of interest on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you don't want to be putting money in and taking money out every month. So, you want to keep the money you're going to need now, or the money you're going to need next month, because your car insurance is coming up. Money that you're going to need in the next few months really isn't there to go off into either long-term savings, investments, paying off your mortgage, or paying off your debt. If you're going to need it in the next few months, then it's really, you need that very easy access in your bank account. But longer term, you don't really need huge amounts of money. 3 to 6 months would be brilliant if you can do that. But if you have got a credit card that is to some extent an emergency thing that you can use, or in overdraft, nobody wants to be using their overdraft because they're really expensive. But if you can live without your overdraft but have it there for an emergency, then that can help. Certainly paying 20% interest on your credit card debt and having a few £1,000s in the bank isn't really a good idea at all.
No. And Damian, you mentioned there about how, interest rates are not fantastic right now, and potentially they could, we think they can't get any worse, but they obviously could at some point. If you want that easy access money, though, it is important that, that emergency fund, it's important to have that easy access, like you say. But if you have got more than that, either now or over time, you build up more than what you need for that kind of emergency fund, and you can put that money away for longer term, what is next? Is it investing? Is that kind of the sensible next step once you've cleared your debts, got some emergency easy access funds? Right, stage 3, this is where we go.
In principle, you can move on to investing, but not necessarily. It's people have to look at it from their own personal viewpoint and attitude to risk. So some people are averse to risk. So you have to realise if you invest your money, you've got to be happy with the idea that you may end up with less than you put in. Yeah. And for a lot of people, they won't be comfortable with that, and that is fine. And I think there's an obsession that people have to invest. They feel there's a compulsion. If you want the money so you can be sure to be able to access it in the next 1 to 2 years. Basically, if you need access to your money within 5 years, you shouldn't be investing anyway. So you have to be prepared to lock it away. So I think for people who are saving, if they are wanting the security, then they just go with longer term products, maybe, so fixed term savings accounts. But then if they have money left over, then they have a plan of what they want to achieve. It may be they want to save for a deposit or for their pension or whatever the goal is that's got a longer term time frame. Then investing opens up to them. And I think people have to realise you don't have to have a lot of money to invest. There are so many products out there now that allow you to invest with as little as 50p a pound. And if you go back in the industry from when I was first in it, and even as recently as 10 years ago, it was still really only the wealthy people that could invest money, or people who had a particular expertise. Now it's been democratized, and that's partly because of technology and things like that. And competition, that it's open to everybody. And it is, Sarah hit the nail on the head about keeping things simple. That applies to investing too. You don't have to overcomplicate things. I think there's a danger we got into a world of overcomplicating things because it justified the expense that people and the charges. Now it's much cheaper. So I think if you've got all your ducks in a row, you have an emergency fund, you then want to try and grow your wealth because you've got money left over, then investing would naturally be the next step.
Fantastic. I mean, there's obviously so much we could talk about there, but I mean, if people check out your site, Money to the Masses, you've got vast archive of material there where people can kind of work out how to get started on that if they want to. Obviously, that investing you mentioned there as well about pensions, mortgages, there's other things people could consider kind of in terms of that investment. I mean, Sarah, actually, mortgages are debts, albeit very, very different to the debts we touched on earlier. With interest rates on mortgages so incredibly low right now, for a lot of new deals anyway, at least, does that make it less of a good idea if people want to overpay on that mortgage and try and get rid of that debt? Again, I appreciate this you can take an investing approach, overpayment approach, pension approach, but if mortgage is where they want to go, does this feel like a good opportunity for your spare cash?
I'm a great believer in people paying off their mortgage as soon as possible. If you have got hundreds of pounds a month and you know you're okay for an emergency fund and you don't have any expensive debt at all, you could put that all into your mortgage, or you could put it all into your pension, or you could put it all into investments outside your pension. I mean, your pension should be an investment. So, I mean, there isn't a choice between pension and investing, because pensions for long-term money really should be in investments. So for long-term money, you can put away, your choice is really mortgage or pension or other long-term savings. You can split it. You can go half and half if you're not sure what to do. It's not a bad, there's no rule that says you have to choose the right one and just go for it, because those things are both important. You want to pay off your house, but you also need to invest money as well. Your house is not your pension. People that put their whole effort into paying off their house or buying a bigger house and then paying off that as well can end up asset rich and cash poor. They've got a great house to live in, but they've got very little income coming in. And you see too many people who say, well, when that happens to me, I'll downsize, I'll move somewhere cheaper. But by that point, you've got all your friends around you, your children are living locally, you like your house because you've spent all the time doing the garden and you've decorated it beautifully. You don't actually want to downsize anymore. You don't feel like retiring to a bungalow in the sea, bungalow by the sea. You want to stay where you are. And there you are stuck if you haven't got a pension to go with it. So people need to do both of these. If people are nervous, then get that mortgage going down, I think, is a really good feeling. And there's some good calculators around. There's some, Martin Lewis has got some on the Money Saving Expert site, which show if you start overpaying your mortgage, how much you will save in interest and how much quicker you can pay off your mortgage in the longer term. And this can be incredibly important, especially if you've only started with a low deposit. So if you've only started with a 5% deposit, by the time you get round to your first fix ends, you want to get that up to 10%, because that will really give you a much better mortgage rate when you come to be able to remortgage.
Damian, I don't know if you want to touch on that, but if not, talking about pensions in particular, anything we need to consider if we're putting more money into pensions from this extra cash we might have right now?
I think what Sarah said is spot on. The point to reiterate really is that she mentioned about these things aren't mutually exclusive. Yeah. There's not one plan that suits anybody. So no matter what the financial plan that you have, it may be like Sarah touched upon about pensions are still one of the best ways to save for your retirement because of the tax boost you get on the way in. But there is the element of flexibility, the trade-off. You can't access it till you're 55, so therefore you might want to invest outside of that. If ultimately there's still investments, and again, like you mentioned about a mortgage, so you want to try and I'm always somebody who tries to promote flexibility, because if you box yourself into a corner, then you lose that flexibility. I suppose the example that Sarah said there about being asset rich, if you owned your house, then you will have to downsize. People would be more preferable to perhaps get to that situation and not have to have that. And the only way you can do that is by investing in a range of assets or having income streams, like Sarah said. And as a nation, we're obsessed with property. Yeah. And it's the one thing that I wish we weren't obsessed with property, because despite what people think, that property generally only just about goes up with inflation. In fact, it doesn't really even do that. If you go over the long-term house prices, they say you can't lose. Well, you do if you take into account inflation. And so the idea that you can suddenly give up part of your house, you could have invested that money in a whole range of assets that would have outperformed property, that would have been far easier and far cheaper to do over a period of time. And that's where I think people should seek advice if they want to get involved in that, or look at some of the new services that are online. Like you say, we cover that on the site. But on the pension front, I think pensions are important because with auto enrollment was a key. I'm a big fan of it. I think it changed the landscape and made people realise that there was effectively free money on the table that they could have if they wanted it. So if you pay into a pension, the government will top it up with tax relief, but also your employer will likely match it too, and they will actually go beyond the legal obligation often. So you can end up putting money into a pension through your work, and your maybe £50 a month you put in suddenly actually becomes more like £120 a month when you take into account what your employer might put in and tax relief. And so that's a really good deal. And if people look at it as free money, then I think they are more inclined to use that. But of course, they can use their money to do other things like save as well. So I think you should look at pensions. I just think you still have to realise whether you can afford it, because there's no point saving for a pension that you're going to use in 40 years if you can't put food on the table now. So there is that trade-off. So I think pensions are important. Just understand them. They're just a box in which an investment lives, just like an ISA and all the other types of boxes that are out there. So yeah, consider how much you can afford, how they work, and what sort of retirement that you want, because like all of these things, I think you have to try and reverse engineer it. And not to labour the point, but if you want to go on a journey anywhere, you work out where you want to go, how to get there, the route you're going to take, the speed you're going to go. Investing is a lot like that. Pensions are a lot like that. You're not going to have £1 million pension pot or £100,000 pension pot if you only put in £10 a month. Yeah. And you do that when you're 40. And so you have to reverse engineer all of this. That's what financial planning really does. So if you're going to put it in there, do it with purpose. Work out what you're trying to do, what you're likely to achieve, and then that will probably increase your success rate.
Guys, thank you so much. Before we head over to Naomi with any questions we've got from viewers, I do want to sort of touch on a point. I think actually, Damian, you mentioned this earlier on, essentially around sort of cost of living and taxation, because the support schemes that we talked about in the last session, they've got to be paid for somehow. We don't know how, whether that's sort of taxation, hopefully not more austerity and more cuts there. The recession is going to have its own impact on the world. Read an article about potentially inflation rates rising higher than we've seen them over the next decade, or interest rates perhaps going negative. Prices, I mean, are likely to go up just generally, aren't they, with companies wanting to recoup their costs because they've made losses now, or adapting to a new normal. Your flights, theatres, there's so many of these companies. And we haven't got time to get into the economics of all those different factors. But ultimately, we're either going to have less money because of taxation or whatever, or the things we need to buy are going to cost more. So that, should we be worrying about possible increases to the cost of living soon, or is this a sort of still a further away thing?
I think for most people that's probably pretty low down the list of things to worry about at the moment, because I mean some of the things you talked about could happen, but you're not terribly likely to get lower or negative interest rates along with galloping inflation. It would be quite a strange situation to give you both of those. I think people should ignore the macroeconomics and work out what's the best for their family now, how to give themselves options and safety under a range of different scenarios in the future. But I wouldn't be too concerned about, on an individual level, about things, because you don't know how taxation is going to change. You don't know what inflation is going to be, and it's not going to make a great deal of difference to what you do at the moment. So there are things which you can decide to do at the moment. You can decide which of your credit card debts you're going to do first. You can decide whether you're going to pay some money off your mortgage or whether you'd like to put some more money into pensions. Those are the practical things where you can actually take control. And that, I think, makes people less anxious once they start with a plan and go forwards. If we introduce, another whole load of macroeconomic things to worry about, well, we'll never do anything at all.
Damian, do you think that's a sense of actually build that emergency fund for what your expenses are right now, rather than worry too much about what they might be then?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why you hear about people talking about inflation could go up is because the central banks have been printing money. So the Central Bank of England, the Bank of England has been printing money to keep the economy going. And very simplistically, if there's more money washing around with a fixed number of assets, the prices should go up. But that's the theory. The reality doesn't always work out that way. They've been printing money 10 years ago and inflation hasn't risen. I mean, I don't think people should worry about what inflation is going to be, but just to touch upon, I think people should be aware that inflation does rob them of their money, fundamentally, the value of it. So if you have your money in savings accounts for all your life, the likelihood is the purchasing power goes down. If you do that over the very long term, then you're not going to be as well off. And I just want to can I throw a book out, a recommendation for a book for people to read? Yeah. There's a book called How to Own the World by a chap called Andrew Craig. Okay, and it's a very simple, he does it brilliantly, it's very easy to understand, and he takes people through the idea of how to run your own finances. And one of the key things he mentions in there is about understanding inflation. And in fact, rich people understand it, and people who aren't rich don't. And by that, he means that they end up owning assets that appreciate with inflation. And inflation is normally much higher than what the headlines tell you. So to touch upon it is quite interesting. So if people want to read that, it's really just saying to people that if you want your money to work for you, you do ultimately need to get into investing at some point, because if you don't, then inflation will just eat away at the value of it. And so to understand inflation, you know how much a Cadbury's cream egg costs today versus what it was when we were a kid or whatever. That is the inflation effect. And of course, for most of us, we get robbed of our money because of it.
Lovely. Thank you, guys. Well, Naomi, I'm going to bring you back in if you're good for that, and see if we've got one or two questions for Damian or Sarah.
Hello. Yeah, we have had a couple of questions come in. First of all, though, not a question, but just a little bit of a plug. Somebody suggested listening to both Andy and Damian's podcast because they'll help you change. So might as well plug that
nice
in there.
That was nice.
One question we've had on investment. Someone saying they've had an investment which has gone down. I have a feeling you might need a crystal ball for this, unfortunately. Will it come back, and when?
The reason I laugh at that is because it's actually a good question, and fundamentally, on a long enough timeline, most things will do. And the idea of this goes back to the point I made at the very beginning. You've got to be comfortable that things go up and down in value. And if you have a long enough time horizon, then things will recover. Because people obsess about this current market sell-off. If you're investing for your pension or even just something else, and you've got like a 10, 20-year timeline, it's not this crash you want to worry about. It's not even the next financial crisis that you've got to worry about. It's probably the one after that, that's just before you want to access your money. This is just part of the journey that we're in. And so you shouldn't obsess about crashes. Your money will go through probably 2 or 3 of these. And Sarah will tell you, because I think her background was also in the city, that this is something that will just be a cycle. It happens. It doesn't mean it feels comfortable, but as long as they're happy with the reason that they owned the investment in the first place, they're still happy with that reasoning, then fundamentally, I'm not giving the person advice, but the chances are it will come back.
Okay. Someone's asked if RCI is an okay bank.
FSCS protection. What else do you need to know? I mean,
yeah, actually we touched on that, didn't we? Just to sort of be clear on that. If the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, you've got up to £85,000 as long as it's in a single financial institution. So, I mean, that is obviously a lot of money. And that's probably well beyond the easy access emergency fund that you need. But as long as the bank has got that, then you're all right. Your money is safe.
I mean, the other.
Sorry, can I just throw in there, Andy,
yeah,
about national savings and investments? Now, their accounts have become competitive again.
Yeah.
And so they're basically the government-backed, you probably talked about this earlier, but the government-backed accounts. And, of course, previously they're not that attractive because they're not really into trying to get your money. But now they are. And so they don't have those limits that you've mentioned. It's only up to a certain point. So it'll be up to, like, say, £1 million or something like that. So you've got much more leeway when it comes to that sort of protection. I know it's, for a lot of people, they don't have to worry about it because they won't have that much money in their savings account, but never say never. And we all remember the financial crisis and what happened to things like Northern Rock and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. I've got one more question here at the moment. I will do it a quick look over while you're looking at this one. Someone's asking, should they take a mortgage holiday and use the money to pay off debt?
That's a really interesting question, because your mortgage is a debt, and if you're taking a mortgage holiday, your actual mortgage is going up. You're not making some payments, so those will need to be paid later, and you'll be getting extra interest on top. But of course, on your mortgage, you are paying 1.5%, 3%, 5% at worst interest. So the question the person is probably asking is it better to take my mortgage holiday and pay off my credit card debt, which I'm paying 18% on?
Yeah.
That's a very interesting question. In a way, you're shuffling your debt around and you're ending up with less credit card debt, which is going to be cheaper, but you're going to end up with more secured debt. And debt advisors don't really like people's secured debt going up, because that's what putting your house at risk. If you can't pay your credit card bill, in the end, you just say, I can't pay. Can I have a payment arrangement? Can you freeze interest? And you can do that with a credit card. You might be scary to try, but it really does work. It doesn't work so well with your mortgage. They can repossess your house if you try that with your mortgage. So for a couple of months, it could be a really good idea if you could let you clear down some expensive debt, especially if you've got really expensive debt. You know, if you've got payday loans or really high 50% type interest guarantor loans or something like that, paying those off faster would be really, really great. Normal credit card rates, yeah, perhaps, but it is a bit of a risk. You are pushing up your mortgage. I'd be quite comfortable. I mean, I think for a lot of people, it is actually a sensible option if they're carrying too much credit card debt at the moment to just pay that off.
So can I just throw something in there, Andy, quickly?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, I'm backing up what Sarah said there about, it's quite an interesting idea, because I saw somebody suggest this today, funny enough, that they in the group that we had, they were doing that, and I suddenly thought, well, I hadn't really thought about the concept of trying to do that, because it's kind of a quick and easy win rather than remortgaging in some way to clear debt, that they're using that holiday to pay it down. I mean, the one thing that I would say to bear in mind that if you take a mortgage holiday, as you've seen on the news, it's not going to affect your credit rating and everything like that, and it shouldn't matter. The one thing you still have to bear in mind when I think this through about how mortgages work and how they underwrite them, you may not have anything on your credit report about the fact you took a mortgage holiday, but when they take that you go to get a mortgage in the future or remortgage and they ask for 6 month statements, I think people are overestimating that, or sort of not realizing that they are still going to look through what you spend your money on, and they're going to sit there and go, hold on, you've not paid a mortgage for 3 months, 6 months, or rent, and they will know that you took a mortgage holiday. And now there is no law, as far as I'm aware, yet that says that they have to, their underwriting process, they can choose who they lend to. They don't have to lend to anybody. So although you are going to be impacted,
that's quite right, but if what you have done is genuinely cleared credit card debt, you are going to be in a better position going for your remortgage because you're not carrying so much credit card debt as well. The worst thing to do is to take your mortgage holiday, clear off your credit card debt, and then run up the credit cards again.
Yeah.
Because if you do that, in 6 months' time, your mortgage is bigger than it was and your credit cards are back to what they used to be. So if you're going to do this, you have to be determined. You have to clear down that debt and close the credit card at the end of it to stop that risk. Otherwise, you've just borrowed off your house and you're then going to go away and spend that again. And that's a really bad idea.
And I think it's interesting as well, isn't it? I mean, if your debts are actually to an extent where, the focus of this session was about people who've got lots of spare money going ahead. But if you're in a situation where your debts are really high and they are having a significant impact on things such as your ability to get a mortgage and your ability to pay them off, and you might just run them up again, then it might be sort of taking a closer look at those debts, which is where your fantastic website comes into play, Sarah.
There's everything about debt on my website, including how to pay it off quickly.
If you want to know about debt, there's not many people I think that know more about debt than Sarah. I have to say she's very, very, very good at it. So do go check her out. That's just me endorsing it because Sarah's actually done odd bits for us actually in the past. She's very good.
Well, I don't know about investing. Money to the masses is a good thing.
It's a loving, isn't it? This is fantastic.
You haven't really got a much disagreement between the panelists on this one, have you?
No, that's why I got you guys. This is a high-powered panel. This has been a really good one. We are well over time though, but it's been really interesting, so I wanted to let it run on. Guys, thank you so much. Quickly again, so it's moneytothemasses.com or .co.uk?
.com.
And it is Camel is .co.uk.
It is, yes.
We will, of course, anything we've spoken about before, we'll get articles from the guys from their websites and other places. Any of the resources from this session and any of the other sessions today, if you go over to ukmoneybloggers.com/lockdown live, you'll be able to sign up and you'll get an email basically where to go for all those different resources. And you can also check out Damian's podcast and my podcast as well if you don't already. Guys, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate you being with us. Naomi, again, thank you as well. I think that's been great. Thank you.
It's been really fun. For what we've just done tonight with these sessions, this is the first time that we've done it as a community. And personally, I think it's gone quite well, but I'm biased. I like money. So talking about this for hours has been really good fun from my point of view. So if anybody watching or you're rewatching, if you like this and you'd like us to do it again, then let us know and we'll think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, if you didn't catch some of the earlier sessions, you can watch them now on the Skint Dad Facebook page and the UK Money Bloggers Facebook page as well. They're all there, all four of them, including if you missed the start of this. Hopefully you'll learn something, and hopefully as we ease out of lockdown, or it continues but in a very different way, you're going to be able to be, your money's going to be in a sort of a healthier situation. I'm going to pop over now, if you're watching this live, to my little community, the Be Clever Your Cash Chats community on Facebook, to answer your questions. If you want to pop over there, I'll be there from 10 o'clock just for 10-15 minutes. Naomi, thank you.
I'm always on Facebook.
You are. Yeah, the Facebook.
Everybody knows where to find me. I'll either be in Reducing Supermarket Spend or in the Skint Dad community group. You know where I am, everyone.
Lovely. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate it, and hopefully see you again soon.